Randolph Scott really was perfect for the Western, but he was more perfect for Cary Grant, and they lived together, quote, on and off for about a decade, an arrangement that outlasted multiple marriages between them and paralleled Grant's evolution into a Hollywood icon.
A note Randolph Scott left behind after his death has reopened a mystery Hollywood spent decades trying to ignore. For years, nobody could explain why one of the biggest Western stars in America shared a beachside home with Cary Grant for 12 years. Their mansion, nicknamed Bachelor Hall, became the center of endless rumors, yet neither man ever offered the explanation everyone wanted. Both married multiple times, yet somehow always ended up back together. People never stopped wondering what really connected them. Nearly 40 years after his death, historians are still arguing about what Randolph Scott was really hiding behind that famous stone face. The man everyone thought they knew. George Randolph Scott was born on January 23, 1898, in Orange County, Virginia, though his family called the town of Charlotte, North Carolina, home. His father worked as one of the very first certified public accountants in the entire state, giving the family a level of comfort most children never experienced. Young Randolph grew up as the only son among 6 children, with his mother, Lucille Crane Scott, running a busy household filled almost entirely with sisters. He attended private schools and excelled at nearly every sport he tried, including football, baseball, swimming, and even horse racing. His athletic talent eventually earned him a spot playing football at Georgia Institute of Technology, where he also began studying engineering, following a fairly ordinary path for a young man from a well-connected Southern family. That path did not last long. In 1917, the United States entered World War I, and Scott joined the North Carolina National Guard almost immediately. Eager to serve despite his family's comfortable standing back home, he trained as an artillery observer, earned 2 promotions within a single year, and shipped out to France as part of the 2nd Trench Mortar Battalion. He saw real combat in the Toul sector before the war ended in November of 1918, then stayed on briefly for the post-war occupation of Germany. The discipline and quiet toughness he carried home from that war would shape nearly every character he later played on screen, long before anyone in Hollywood had ever heard his name. After the war, Scott briefly returned to Georgia Tech before transferring to the University of North Carolina, bouncing between different schools without ever quite settling on a clear direction for his future. Friends from that period later remembered him as more interested in sports and socializing than in any particular academic subject. After returning to the United States, Scott briefly worked in his father's accounting firm back in Charlotte, but the numbers never held his attention the way performing did. A chance connection through his father eventually opened a door that would change the entire course of his life. Scott's father had a personal connection to producer Howard Hughes, and in 1927, he wrote his son a letter of introduction before Randolph left for California. It was a small favor that ended up launching one of the longest careers in Hollywood history. Once in Los Angeles, Scott worked small extra roles for a few years, slowly building experience in front of the camera in films most audiences barely remember today. One of those early roles put him alongside star Gary Cooper in a 1929 picture called The Virginian, where Scott reportedly also helped Cooper refine his Southern accent for the role, an early sign of the quiet expertise he brought to every project. His break came when legendary director Cecil B. DeMille noticed something in him and encouraged him to train seriously at the Pasadena Playhouse, one of the most respected acting schools in the country. The training paid off quickly. Throughout the 1930s, Scott built a reputation playing steady, honorable men in a string of low-budget westerns based on novels by author Zane Grey, giving him the perfect training ground for the genre that would define his entire career. Studios also began loaning him out for bigger, more varied projects. Paramount sent him to RKO to support major stars like Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, and Irene Dunne in the musical Roberta, proving he could hold his own outside of dusty frontier towns as well. By the end of the decade, Scott had appeared in bigger productions like The Last of the Mohicans and Jesse James, proving he could headline major studio pictures rather than just cheap westerns. His tall frame, calm voice, and quiet confidence made him instantly believable as a frontier hero. Unlike some cowboy stars of the era, Scott brought real restraint to his characters. He rarely raised his voice on screen, letting a single look or a slow, deliberate movement carry more weight than shouting ever could. A style that quietly separated him from nearly every other actor working in the genre. That calm, controlled image on screen stood in sharp contrast to something happening in his personal life at the exact same time. A friendship that would follow him for the rest of his career and long after his death. The friendship Hollywood couldn't explain. In 1932, Scott worked on a film called Hot Saturday alongside a rising British actor named Cary Grant. The two men hit it off almost instantly, and within months, they had moved in together, first in a house in the Los Feliz neighborhood, and later in a beachfront property in Santa Monica. Fan magazines quickly gave the shared home a nickname, calling it Bachelor Hall, and studio publicity departments leaned into the story hard. Photographers were sent out constantly to capture the two stars cooking together, lounging by the pool, and generally acting like an inseparable pair of carefree young bachelors. The arrangement lasted on and off for roughly 12 years. During that stretch, both men built massive careers, and both men also became the subject of constant Hollywood gossip about the true nature of their friendship. Whispers that studio executives worked hard to control rather than confirm or deny outright. A mutual friend, actress Carole Lombard, once joked that the perfect arrangement between the two men involved one paying the household bills while the other simply handled the mail, a line that captured just how domestic their partnership actually looked to everyone around them. It was funny, but it also fueled even more speculation. Fan magazine spreads sometimes leaned into the joke even further, photographing the two grown men wearing matching aprons or lounging together in near-identical outfits. Images that seem almost impossible to imagine any studio publicity department approving today. Even their cars and their taste in furniture were frequently noted by gossip columnists as suspiciously matched. Neither man ever publicly confirmed anything beyond friendship, and both remained famously guarded about their private lives for the rest of their careers. That silence, more than anything either of them ever said, is exactly what kept the mystery alive for nearly a century afterward. In 1934, studio pressure pushed Cary Grant into his first marriage, a move widely believed at the time to be aimed at quieting the persistent rumors surrounding Bachelor Hall. The marriage barely lasted a year, and once it ended, Grant simply moved right back in with Scott at the beach house. 2 years later, in 1936, Scott married Marion DuPont, an heiress from one of the wealthiest families in America, having actually served as best man at her first wedding years earlier. That marriage also ended quickly, lasting only 3 years and producing no children, after which Scott, too, returned to something resembling his old bachelor life for a period of time. Curiously, Marion kept using the Scott name for nearly 5 decades after their divorce, right up until her own death in 1983. A small detail that biographers have often pointed to whenever discussing how unusual and amicable the marriage really was. Scott himself later described the split publicly as entirely friendly, explaining that the two of them had simply spent too much time apart for the marriage to work. Between the two of them, Grant would eventually marry 5 times over his life, and Scott would marry twice. Yet both men kept circling back to each other throughout the 1930s and into the mid-1940s. To many observers at the time, the pattern itself raised as many questions as it seemed designed to answer. The living arrangement finally ended for good in 1944, when Scott married actress Patricia Stillman, a marriage that would last the rest of his life. Even so, Scott and Grant remained close, publicly friendly companions for the following 4 decades, right up until Grant's death in 1986. Scott passed away himself just months later, in the spring of 1987, a timing that many fans and biographers have found difficult to view as pure coincidence. even though no evidence has ever directly connected the two events beyond simple, sad timing. The Man Who Walked Away. By the 1950s, Scott had entered the most artistically respected stretch of his entire career. Working alongside director Bud Boiticher and producer Harry Joe Brown, he helped create a series of lean, tightly written westerns, now often referred to by film historians as the Randolph cycle. These films, including titles like 7 Men From Now, The Tall T, Ride Lonesome, and Comanche Station, moved away from simple good versus evil stories. Instead, they gave Scott a chance to play older, more weathered characters, wrestling with genuine moral conflict, a noticeable shift from his earlier, more straightforward, heroic roles. Critics at the time and film historians ever since have pointed to this period as the true high point of Scott's acting career. The characters felt lived in and human, shaped by regret and hard experience rather than simple courage alone, and audiences responded strongly to the change. During these same years, Scott was also consistently ranked among the top 10 box office draws in America, appearing on major industry polls from 1950 through 1953. Very few actors in history have managed to combine that level of commercial success with this kind of critical respect within a single decade. Decades later, filmmakers and critics still study these lean, character-driven westerns as some of the finest examples the genre ever produced. Proof that Scott's influence stretched far beyond his own lifetime and into generations of directors who came after him. The Randolph collaboration eventually built toward one final unforgettable performance, a farewell that would close out Scott's entire acting career on the highest possible note. In 1962, Scott starred in Ride the High Country alongside fellow Western icon Joel McCrea, directed by a young filmmaker named Sam Peckinpah. The film is now widely considered one of the finest Westerns ever made, and Scott chose it as the perfect note to end his acting career on. After more than 100 films across 3.5 decades, Scott simply walked away from Hollywood entirely. Unlike many aging stars who struggled with life after fame, he embraced retirement completely, settling into a quiet, private routine in Beverly Hills alongside his wife and 2 adopted children. After retiring from acting, Randolph Scott did something almost unheard of in Hollywood. At a time when many aging stars desperately searched for comeback roles or struggled to adjust to life outside the spotlight, Scott simply walked away. He never announced a dramatic return, never chased television work, and never tried to relive his glory days. Instead, he embraced a quiet life that suited his personality far better than fame ever had. Much of his retirement was spent on the golf course, one of his greatest passions, or overseeing the extensive real estate investments he had built over decades. Unlike many actors who spent lavishly and depended entirely on movie salaries, Scott had always treated acting as both an art and a business. He invested carefully, bought valuable properties, and lived well within his means. Those disciplined financial decisions paid off enormously. By the time he died, his fortune was reportedly approaching $100 million, making him one of the wealthiest former actors of his generation, despite having been away from the screen for nearly 25 years. Scott also maintained a small circle of lifelong friends. Among them was entertainer Fred Astaire, with whom he frequently attended baseball games and social gatherings away from Hollywood cameras. His faith remained another central part of his life. A devoted Christian, Scott developed a lasting friendship with Billy Graham. The two men shared similar values, and their friendship continued until Scott's final years. He was also reportedly the only actor of his era admitted to one of Los Angeles's most exclusive private country clubs, a reflection of the respect he commanded far beyond the film industry. Politically, Scott held conservative views and became one of the earliest Hollywood supporters of Ronald Reagan during Reagan's campaign for governor of California, years before Reagan entered national politics. It was one of the few occasions when Scott publicly expressed a political opinion, as he generally preferred to avoid controversy and publicity. The truth. he took to the grave. Long after Bachelor Hall closed its doors, the speculation surrounding Scott and Grant never fully went away. Respected Hollywood historian William J. Mann wrote about the pair extensively in his research on gay and lesbian influence in early Hollywood, citing photographers and insiders who described the two men as deeply connected during those years. One photographer in particular reportedly spent months documenting the movie colony's social circles at the time, and his surviving photographs of Grant and Scott together are still cited by researchers today as evidence of just how close and comfortable the two men appeared around each other, both in public and in private settings. Fashion critic Richard Blackwell later claimed in his own memoir that he had lived with both men and witnessed their relationship firsthand, describing it as genuine and deeply affectionate. Director George Cukor, a contemporary of both actors, was quoted suggesting that Grant avoided the topic entirely, while Scott, in private, was more willing to acknowledge it to close friends. Not everyone agrees with that version of events. Both men consistently and publicly denied any romantic relationship throughout their entire lives, and Scott's adopted son Christopher has spoken out over the years defending his father's reputation against what he considers unfounded rumor built on decades of second-hand gossip rather than solid proof. Many friends and colleagues from the era also insisted the two men were simply close, private friends who valued their independence from Hollywood's usual social scene. Cary Grant himself never let the subject go quietly either. In 1980, well into his 70s, he filed a $10 million lawsuit against comedian Chevy Chase after Chase joked about the old rumors during a television appearance, showing just how seriously Grant took the accusations even decades after Bachelor Hall had closed. Grant's own daughter later suggested in her own book that her father may have actually welcomed the rumors at certain points in his career, believing the mystery only added to his appeal, a theory that seems to directly contradict the lawsuit he filed against Chase just years earlier. No definitive proof has ever surfaced either way, and both men took whatever the full truth actually was to their graves. What remains is one of the most enduring, most debated relationships in the entire history of classic Hollywood, still argued about by historians nearly a century after it began. Long after his acting career ended, Scott kept showing up in American pop culture in ways almost nobody expected. His face was reportedly used as the model for the original Oakland Raiders logo back in 1960, a design that remained largely unchanged for more than 50 years afterward, quietly making him one of the most reproduced faces in American sports history without most fans ever realizing it. In 1973, the country group the Statler Brothers released a song called Whatever Happened to Randolph Scott, which became a top 20 country hit and introduced an entirely new generation to his name decades after his last film had already come out. The song itself was a nostalgic tribute, mourning the loss of simple, honorable heroes in an increasingly complicated world. Even comedy legend Mel Brooks paid tribute to Scott's legacy, referencing his name directly in the classic film Blazing Saddles as shorthand for old-fashioned, unquestionable heroism. A joke that only worked because audiences instantly understood exactly what Scott's name represented, more than a decade after he had already retired from the screen. He also turned up internationally in unexpected places, caricatured as a comic book cavalry colonel in a popular French Western series years after his retirement. Proof that his particular brand of quiet, rugged heroism had traveled far beyond American audiences and stayed recognizable across entirely different cultures and languages. Scott died on March 2, 1987, at the age of 89, following years of declining health from heart and lung problems. His funeral service back in Charlotte was conducted in part by his old friend Reverend Billy Graham, and he was laid to rest at Elmwood Cemetery, just blocks from the house where he grew up. More than 100 films, over 60 of them westerns, secured his place as one of the defining faces of the entire genre, influencing generations of directors and actors who followed his lead long after he had walked away from the cameras for good. But it is the quiet mystery he left behind, the story that historians are still piecing together today, that keeps his name alive in ways his movies alone never could. Randolph Scott's legacy extends far beyond the westerns that made him a legend. While his films continue to inspire new generations, the private life he carefully guarded remains one of Hollywood's most talked about stories. Some questions may never be answered, and perhaps that's exactly why his name still endures. If you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more untold Hollywood stories. See you in the next video.